Sometimes the darkest night is the one that changes your life forever. The lights went out across downtown Chicago at exactly 7:18 p.m. One moment, storefronts glowed against the cold autumn rain. The next, everything disappeared into darkness. Traffic signals stopped working. Office buildings went black. Streetlights vanished. For several seconds, the city seemed to hold its breath. Inside Brooks Corner Books, Hannah Brooks stood frozen behind the register, staring at the sudden darkness surrounding her. A few customers gasped. Someone dropped a magazine. Outside, car horns began sounding in the distance as drivers struggled to navigate intersections without signals. Hannah reached beneath the counter and grabbed a flashlight. It was old, scratched, and far from impressive, but it worked. Her father had given it to her years ago, and she carried it almost everywhere. The beam flickered once before illuminating the room. "Everyone stay calm," she called. "The power will probably be back soon." Her voice helped. Customers relaxed. Hannah moved through the bookstore, guiding people carefully toward the front entrance. One by one they left, disappearing into the rainy darkness outside. Within 15 minutes the store was empty. Hannah locked the door and glanced through the front window. The neighborhood looked eerie. Buildings stood in complete darkness. The only light came from occasional flashlights and the headlights of slow-moving vehicles. She checked her phone. No signal. No updates. No explanation. Just silence. "Great," she muttered. The bookstore could not afford many disruptions. Business had already been difficult for months. Every unexpected closure hurt. Yet standing there worrying would not solve anything. Hannah slipped on her coat, grabbed the flashlight, and stepped outside. The rain had become heavier. Cold wind pushed water across the sidewalks. Several people hurried past carrying umbrellas. Others stood outside buildings looking confused. As Hannah prepared to walk toward the bus stop, she noticed movement near the entrance to a nearby train station. A man stood alone beside the stairwell leading underground. Even from a distance, something looked wrong. He appeared to be searching for something in the darkness. Hannah hesitated briefly before heading toward him. "Excuse me," she called. The man turned. Rainwater dripped from his dark coat. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I think so." His voice sounded calm, though slightly frustrated. "I was trying to find my way back to the street when the lights went out." Hannah lifted the flashlight. The beam illuminated his face. He looked to be in his late 30s. Tired. Slightly soaked from the rain. Yet there was something steady about him. "The station is completely dark?" she asked. "Pretty much." He glanced behind him. "I made it out, but I am not exactly sure where I am." Hannah laughed softly. "You picked an interesting night to get lost." A faint smile appeared on his face. Apparently, thunder rumbled somewhere above the city. The rain intensified. Hannah looked around. Most businesses had already closed their doors because of the outage. "Do you have somewhere to go?" she asked. "Not immediately." "Then standing in the rain is a terrible plan." He laughed quietly. "I was beginning to suspect that." Hannah pointed down the block. "My bookstore still has emergency lanterns and dry chairs." "You are inviting a complete stranger into your bookstore?" "You look cold." "That is not exactly an answer." "Maybe it is." For a moment he studied her. Then he nodded. "All right." Together they walked through the rain toward the bookstore. Hannah unlocked the door and led him inside. The familiar smell of books filled the air. Without electricity, the store felt completely different. Shadows stretched across shelves. Flashlight beams reflected off glossy covers. Hannah lit several battery-powered lanterns and placed them around the room. Warm light slowly replaced the darkness. "Much better," she said. The stranger looked around. "This place is incredible." Hannah smiled. "Thank you." She moved behind a small counter and opened a cabinet. "Coffee. You have coffee during a citywide blackout." "I have emergency supplies." "Impressive." Years of running a bookstore. A few minutes later, she handed him a steaming paper cup. He accepted it gratefully. "Thank you." "You are welcome." For a while they sat quietly near the front window, watching rain fall across the darkened street. The city outside remained powerless. Yet inside the bookstore, the lanterns created a small island of warmth. Eventually Hannah glanced at him. "I never got your name." He hesitated for just a fraction of a second. "Nathan." "Nice to meet you, Nathan." "Likewise." Neither of them knew it yet, but that simple introduction would become the beginning of a story neither could have imagined. Because while Hannah saw only a stranger caught in a blackout, the man sitting across from her was Nathan Carter, one of the wealthiest entrepreneurs in the country. And at that moment, surrounded by darkness and candle-like lantern light, he was about to discover something far more valuable than money. The storm continued through the evening. Rain tapped steadily against the bookstore windows while the city outside remained trapped in darkness. Hannah adjusted one of the lanterns and glanced toward the street. Normally, at this hour, traffic filled the avenue and bright signs illuminated every corner. Tonight, only shadows moved through the rain. Nathan sat comfortably in a chair near a shelf of classic novels, holding the warm cup of coffee Hannah had given him. For the first time in weeks, he felt oddly disconnected from his usual life. No conference calls, no board meetings, no executives waiting for instructions. Just silence, books, and the woman who had opened her door to a stranger without hesitation. "Do blackouts happen often around here?" he asked. Hannah smiled. "Not like this." She sat across from him. "The neighborhood lost power for a few hours last summer, but nothing this big." Nathan looked around the bookstore. "You seem prepared. I learned a long time ago that plans rarely survive reality." "That sounds like experience talking." Hannah laughed softly. "It is. Small businesses teach you that lesson pretty quickly." Nathan studied her for a moment. There was no bitterness in her voice. No self-pity. Just honesty. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. Hannah glanced around the store. "Almost 7 years. That is a long time. Long enough to know which books people pretend to read and which ones they actually finish." Nathan laughed. "That sounds useful." "It is surprisingly useful." She stood and walked toward a nearby shelf. "For example, everyone buys books about becoming successful." She pulled out a thick hardcover. "But the books people return to are usually the ones about finding meaning." Nathan found himself smiling. Most people treated success as the ultimate goal. Hannah spoke about it as though it were only part of a much larger picture. "What about you?" she asked. "What do you do?" Nathan hesitated briefly. "Energy consulting." It was not technically a lie, just a very small portion of the truth. "That sounds important." "Sometimes." Hannah returned the book to the shelf. "Do you enjoy it?" The question caught him off guard. Most people asked how much money he made, how large his company was, how many employees worked for him. Very few asked whether he enjoyed his work. "I used to," he admitted. "And now?" Nathan looked down at his coffee. "Sometimes it feels like I spend more time managing problems than helping people." Hannah nodded thoughtfully. "That happens." "You sound very certain." "Because I see it all the time." She pointed toward the front of the store. "People come in looking for answers. Most of them are carrying problems nobody else knows about." Nathan listened carefully. "And what do you tell them?" "Usually nothing." "Nothing?" Hannah smiled. "Most people do not need advice. They need someone willing to listen." The answer settled quietly between them. Outside, thunder rolled across the city again. Inside, the bookstore remained warm beneath the lantern light. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Hannah reached into her coat pocket and removed the flashlight she had used earlier. Nathan immediately noticed how worn it looked. The metal casing carried scratches and faded paint from years of use. "You seem attached to that flashlight," he said. Hannah looked down at it and smiled. "My father gave it to me. When? Years ago." Her expression softened. "He always said everyone should carry a little extra light, because you never know who might need it." Nathan looked at the flashlight differently after hearing that. It was not simply an emergency tool. It was a reminder. A piece of someone she loved. Hannah gently placed it beside her. "I know it sounds silly." "It does not sound silly at all." She smiled gratefully. The conversation continued for hours. They talked about books, family, favorite places in the city, and dreams they had almost forgotten. At some point, Hannah heated another pot of coffee. At another point, Nathan helped organize a shelf that had become slightly disordered. The strange thing was how natural everything felt, as if they had known each other far longer than a few hours. Eventually, close to midnight, lights suddenly flickered across the street. One building illuminated, then another. A few seconds later, the bookstore itself came back to life. Lamps glowed. Registers beeped. The familiar hum of electricity returned. Hannah blinked at the brightness. "Looks like the city survived." Nathan smiled. "Looks like it." Yet neither seemed eager to leave. Because somewhere between the darkness, the coffee, and the conversation, something unexpected had happened. Two strangers had shared an ordinary evening, and neither realized that it was only the beginning of a story that would change both of their lives. The next morning, Chicago looked as though nothing unusual had happened. Traffic flowed through intersections. Storefronts glowed with electricity. People hurried toward work carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Yet for Hannah Brooks, something felt different. As she unlocked the bookstore and switched on the lights, she found herself thinking about the stranger from the blackout, Nathan. It surprised her how easily their conversation had unfolded. Most customers passed through the bookstore quickly. Few stayed long enough to talk. Yet somehow she had spent nearly 5 hours speaking with a man she had met only that evening. She shook her head and laughed softly at the thought. Then she got back to work. Across the city, Nathan Carter sat inside a conference room overlooking the skyline. A presentation filled a giant screen. Executives discussed recovery efforts following the outage. Engineers reviewed reports. Financial analysts calculated costs. The meeting should have demanded his complete attention. Instead, his thoughts kept drifting toward a small bookstore illuminated by lanterns. "Nathan," one executive asked, "your recommendation?" Nathan looked up. Several people around the table waited expectantly. "Proceed with the infrastructure review," he answered, "and prioritize community impact." The executives nodded and continued. Yet even as the meeting moved forward, he found himself remembering Hannah's words from the night before. Most people do not need advice. They need someone willing to listen. Simple words, yet strangely powerful. After the meeting ended, Nathan did something unusual. Instead of heading to another appointment, he instructed his driver to stop several blocks from Brooks Corner Books. He wanted to walk. The autumn air felt crisp. Sunlight reflected from windows and puddles left behind by the storm. By the time he reached the bookstore, he had convinced himself he was only curious about whether the business had survived the outage. Nothing more. The bell above the door chimed softly as he entered. Hannah looked up from behind the counter and smiled immediately. Nathan, for reasons he could not explain, hearing her say his name felt unexpectedly good. "Good morning. I was wondering if you survived civilization returning." Nathan laughed. "Barely." Hannah smiled. "That bad? People seem much less interesting when the lights are on." The answer made her laugh. Several customers glanced over curiously. Nathan found himself smiling too. It felt easy, natural, the exact opposite of most interactions he experienced during a normal day. "Looking for anything specific?" Hannah asked. "Actually, yes." He looked around thoughtfully. "A recommendation." Hannah immediately stepped away from the register. "That depends." "On what? Do you want a book that entertains you or a book that changes you?" Nathan considered the question. "Which one would you choose?" Hannah walked toward a shelf near the back of the store and pulled out a worn hardcover. "This one." Nathan accepted the book. The edges were slightly faded from years of readers turning its pages. "What makes it special?" he asked. "It reminds people that success and happiness are not always the same thing." Nathan stared at the cover for a moment. Then he looked at her. "You really believe that?" "Absolutely." Her answer came without hesitation. Nathan purchased the book despite already owning more books than he could read in a lifetime. Before leaving, he glanced toward the old flashlight resting on a shelf near the register. "Your father's flashlight?" Hannah nodded. "I keep it close. Even when there is no blackout. Especially when there is no blackout." Nathan smiled. "Why?" Hannah gently picked it up. "Because people forget how important light is when everything is bright." For several seconds, he simply looked at her. Then he nodded. "That is a good answer." As the afternoon passed, Nathan found himself opening the book she recommended. A few chapters became several more. By evening, he realized something surprising. He was enjoying it. More than that, he was learning from it. Not because the ideas were new, because they reminded him of things he had forgotten. Meanwhile, Hannah closed the bookstore and prepared to leave for the night. Before turning off the lights, she noticed something unusual. A business card had been left near the register. She picked it up and examined it. The front contained only a first name and phone number. Nathan. No company. No title. No explanation. Hannah smiled. Most people handed out cards designed to impress strangers. This one revealed almost nothing. She slipped it into her pocket. Neither of them knew it yet, but the chance meeting created by a citywide blackout was already beginning to change the direction of both their lives. And somewhere inside a worn flashlight, a forgotten lesson about carrying extra light was quietly waiting for its moment to return. Over the following weeks, Nathan became a regular presence at Brooks Corner Books. At first, Hannah assumed he simply enjoyed reading. Then she noticed a pattern. He always seemed to appear when the store was quiet. He stayed longer than most customers. And somehow, he never left without buying at least one book, even when she suspected he already owned enough reading material to fill an entire library. One rainy Thursday afternoon, Hannah was rearranging a display near the front window when Nathan walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Please tell me one of those is for me," she said. Nathan handed her a cup. "I have learned that bookstore owners become significantly friendlier when properly caffeinated." Hannah laughed. "That is surprisingly accurate." They settled into 2 chairs near the reading corner while rain tapped softly against the glass. Outside, people hurried beneath umbrellas. Inside, the bookstore felt warm and peaceful. "Business seems slow today," Nathan observed. Hannah glanced around the mostly empty shop. "That describes most Thursdays. Does that worry you?" The question lingered longer than she expected. "Sometimes." Nathan waited. Hannah looked down at her coffee. "Independent bookstores are not exactly thriving these days. Yet you stay." "Because I love this place." Her answer came immediately. "Some people inherit family businesses. Some inherit houses. I inherited stories." Nathan smiled. "That sounds like something from one of these books. Maybe that is why I work here." The conversation drifted naturally from there. They discussed favorite authors, childhood memories, and the strange ways people changed over time. The more they talked, the more Nathan found himself looking forward to these moments. Around Hannah, conversations felt honest, uncomplicated. Nobody cared about stock prices or corporate rankings. Nobody expected anything from him except sincerity. One evening after closing, Hannah was preparing to lock the front door when she noticed Nathan still browsing a shelf near the back. "You know we close in 5 minutes, right?" Nathan held up a book. "I am making an important decision." "Between what?" "This one and that one." Hannah walked over and glanced at both titles. "That is not a difficult decision." "No." She took one of the books from his hand and returned it to the shelf. "Definitely this one." Nathan looked impressed. "You did not even hesitate." "Years of experience." "I stand corrected." As they walked toward the register, Nathan noticed a stack of unopened envelopes beside the counter. Most people would have ignored them. Hannah tried to. But something in her expression caught his attention. "Everything okay?" he asked gently. Hannah hesitated. Mostly. Mostly sounds suspicious." She smiled faintly. "Just normal business problems." Nathan nodded but said nothing further. He understood that look. He had seen it countless times in entrepreneurs trying to protect their dreams from reality. The next morning, while Hannah helped a customer find a novel, Nathan sat alone in his office high above downtown Chicago. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Several executives discussed quarterly performance around a polished conference table. Yet Nathan's thoughts kept drifting back to the bookstore, specifically to the unopened envelopes. After the meeting ended, he quietly asked one trusted assistant to gather publicly available information about Brooks Corner books. Nothing intrusive, just basic facts. The report arrived later that afternoon. Nathan read it carefully. Rising rent, declining sales, increasing operational costs. The bookstore was surviving, but only barely. He leaned back in his chair and stared out at the skyline. For the first time, he understood the weight Hannah carried behind her smile. She never complained, never asked for help. Yet every day, she fought to keep something meaningful alive. That realization affected him more than he expected. A few days later, Nathan returned to the bookstore carrying another book. "Already finished the last one?" Hannah asked. "Twice." She laughed. "You are either a very fast reader or a terrible liar. Possibly both." As she reached for the book, the old flashlight slipped from the shelf and landed gently on the counter. Nathan picked it up before it could fall farther. He turned it over carefully in his hands. The metal was worn smooth from years of use. "You really carry this everywhere?" he asked. Hannah nodded. "Every day. Because of your father?" "Because of what he taught me." Nathan handed it back. "Which was?" Hannah smiled softly. "If you have light, share it." The word stayed with him long after he left the store. Because sitting in traffic later that evening, watching city lights reflect across the windshield, Nathan realized something important. Hannah had been sharing her light with people for years. She shared it through kindness, through patience, through books, through belief in others. And without realizing it, she had started sharing it with him too. Winter slowly gave way to spring, but the challenges facing Brooks Corner books did not disappear with the snow. If anything, they became more obvious. Hannah noticed it every morning when she reviewed sales reports. She noticed it when fewer customers walked through the door. She noticed it whenever another envelope arrived requesting payment. Still, she refused to let discouragement take root. The bookstore had survived difficult seasons before. Somehow, she believed it would survive this one too. One afternoon, while reorganizing a shelf near the back of the store, Hannah received a phone call from the building owner. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. By the time it ended, she sat quietly behind the register staring at the wall. Rent would increase again in 3 months. Not dramatically, just enough to make survival even harder. Hannah rubbed her forehead and forced herself to smile as a customer approached. She had become skilled at carrying worries privately. Unfortunately, Nathan noticed the difference immediately. He arrived later that evening carrying a novel he claimed he was returning, despite the fact that he had purchased it only 2 days earlier. Hannah recognized the excuse for what it was. A reason to visit. "You finished that already?" she asked. Nathan looked entirely unapologetic. "I read quickly." "Or you wanted an excuse to stop by?" "Possibly both." Hannah laughed softly, but Nathan noticed the exhaustion behind it. As they settled into their usual chairs near the reading corner, he studied her carefully. Something happened. Hannah looked up. "What makes you think that?" "Because your smile is slightly smaller than normal." She rolled her eyes. "That is not a real measurement." "It is for me." For a moment she considered avoiding the subject. Then she sighed. "Just business problems." "The bookstore?" Hannah nodded. The building owner raised the rent again. Nathan remained silent. "It is not anyone's fault," she continued. "Costs go up. Markets change. That is how life works." "You sound like you are trying to convince yourself." Hannah smiled faintly. "Maybe." Nathan glanced around the store. Every shelf reflected years of effort. Every corner felt personal. It was obvious this place meant more to her than a job. "What would happen if things became too difficult?" he asked carefully. Hannah looked around the room before answering. "I honestly do not know." The answer stayed with him long after he left that evening. The following week, Nathan found himself standing in front of the bookstore long before opening hours. He watched Hannah unlock the door, switch on the lights, and begin another day. She never complained, never asked for help. Yet every action revealed how deeply she cared about the place. Later that afternoon, inside the headquarters of Carter Energy Group, Nathan requested a meeting with a small development team. Several executives entered expecting discussions about infrastructure projects or energy investments. Instead, Nathan spread photographs of Brooks Corner books across the table. "I need information about this building," he said. The room fell silent. "The building?" one executive asked. "Everything. Ownership structure, lease agreements, long-term outlook." The executives exchanged curious glances but asked no questions. When Nathan wanted information, there was usually a reason. Over the next several weeks, research quietly continued. Meanwhile, Hannah focused on keeping the bookstore alive. She organized reading events, expanded community programs, created children's workshops. Attendance improved slightly, but financial pressure remained. Through it all, Nathan continued visiting. Sometimes they discussed books. Sometimes they discussed life. Sometimes they simply enjoyed the comfortable silence that had developed between them. One Saturday afternoon, Hannah showed him an old scrapbook filled with photographs from the bookstore's history. Nathan turned the pages carefully. Generations of readers smiled from faded pictures. Community events filled the pages. Local authors, children's programs, charity drives. "You build all of this?" he asked. Hannah shook her head. "Not me. A lot of people." She pointed toward an older photograph. "My father started most of these programs." Nathan paused. "You miss him?" Hannah smiled softly. "Every day." He looked down at the photograph again. Suddenly the flashlight made even more sense. The bookstore made sense. The determination made sense. She was not simply protecting a business. She was protecting a legacy. That realization changed everything. Because Nathan no longer saw Brooks Corner Books as a struggling bookstore. He saw it as something much larger. A place that had quietly improved lives for decades. A place worth saving. And as he sat across from Hannah watching sunlight stream through the front windows, he made a decision. He would find a way to protect the future she cared about so deeply. The only question remaining was how to do it without changing the very thing that made her special. The invitation arrived on a Monday morning. Hannah almost ignored it. Between inventory reports, supplier calls, and preparations for an upcoming reading event, she barely had time to check her email. Yet something about the message caught her attention. Community Energy Initiative Press Conference. Attendance requested. The event would take place downtown at one of the city's largest convention centers. Hannah frowned. She had no connection to energy projects. No reason to attend. Then she noticed a handwritten note attached to the digital invitation. I think you might find this interesting. Nathan. Hannah smiled despite herself. Over the previous months, Nathan had occasionally surprised her with unusual recommendations, books, and invitations. Most turned out to be worthwhile. Still, she found the message strange. What possible connection could he have to a city energy conference? Curiosity eventually won. 3 days later, Hannah stood near the back of a crowded auditorium filled with reporters, business leaders, city officials, and community representatives. Large screens displayed logos and promotional materials. Television cameras lined the aisles. Everything about the event felt far more important than she expected. She checked her phone. No message from Nathan. No explanation. Just the original invitation. Maybe this was a mistake, she whispered. The lights dimmed. Conversations faded. A presenter stepped onto the stage and welcomed everyone. Several speakers discussed infrastructure improvements, community investments, and future development plans. Hannah listened politely, but remained confused. Then the presenter smiled. None of today's achievements would have been possible without the vision and leadership of one individual. Applause began spreading through the room. Hannah glanced toward the stage. Please join me in welcoming the founder and chief executive officer of Carter Energy Group, Mr. Nathan Carter. For a moment, Hannah thought she had misheard. Then the giant screens illuminated. A photograph appeared. Nathan, the same Nathan who spent rainy afternoons reading novels in her bookstore. The same Nathan who drank coffee beside her reading corner. The same Nathan who wandered into her life during a blackout carrying nothing but a wet coat and a quiet smile. The audience stood immediately. Hundreds of people applauded. Some cheered. Reporters raised cameras. Executives smiled proudly. Hannah remained frozen. Her eyes never left the screen. Founder and Chief Executive Officer. Carter Energy Group. The words seemed impossible. Then Nathan himself stepped onto the stage. He looked exactly the same and completely different all at once. The room responded with admiration and respect. Yet all Hannah could think about was every conversation they had shared. Every question he asked. Every answer he avoided. Every moment she assumed he was simply another ordinary man trying to find his place in the world. Suddenly, countless details made sense. The confidence, the intelligence, the ability to appear wherever he wanted, the mysterious schedule, the private meetings he never fully explained. Nathan began speaking about infrastructure improvements and community investment. The audience listened carefully. Hannah barely heard a word. Her thoughts moved too quickly. Had he known all along? Of course he had. Had he watched her struggle while keeping this enormous secret? Absolutely. The realization stung more than she expected. Then another slide appeared behind him. Architectural renderings filled the screens. Hannah's breath caught instantly. She recognized the building. Brooks Corner Books. Or rather, the building surrounding it. The presentation continued. Community literacy programs. Educational outreach initiatives. Reading spaces. Public gathering areas. Her heart began racing. Nathan pointed toward one of the renderings. Strong communities are built around places that bring people together. Another slide appeared. It featured photographs of independent bookstores, literacy centers, and neighborhood programs. One photograph showed Brooks Corner Books. Hannah stared at it in disbelief. The presenter beside Nathan continued describing a new citywide initiative supporting community education and local cultural institutions. Reporters hurriedly took notes. Applause followed. Yet Hannah no longer cared about the project details. One question overwhelmed everything else. Why had he never told her who he really was? As the presentation ended, the audience rose once more. Nathan thanked everyone and stepped away from the podium. Across the crowded room, his eyes found hers almost immediately. The applause seemed to disappear. The cameras vanished. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Hannah turned and walked toward the exit. She needed air. She needed answers. Most of all, she needed distance from the man she suddenly realized she never truly knew at all. Hannah did not return to the bookstore immediately after leaving the conference. Instead, she walked through downtown Chicago for nearly an hour. The city moved around her in a blur of traffic, conversations, and flashing signs. None of it registered. Every thought led back to Nathan. Or perhaps more accurately, Nathan Carter. Chief Executive Officer. Millionaire entrepreneur. Public figure. Somehow, those titles felt completely disconnected from the man who spent rainy afternoons discussing novels in a bookstore reading corner. By the time she reached home, frustration had replaced shock. She replayed every conversation they had shared. Every time he answered a question without truly answering it. Every mysterious absence. Every coincidence that no longer seemed accidental. The more she thought about it, the more hurt she felt. Not because Nathan was wealthy. That part did not matter. What mattered was that he knew exactly who he was while she had no idea. The next morning, Brooks Corner Books opened as usual. Hannah focused on work with unusual determination. Inventory, customer orders, event planning, anything that kept her busy. Around noon, the front door opened. She did not need to look up to know who it was. Nathan stood quietly near the entrance. For a moment, neither spoke. Several customers browsed nearby shelves, unaware of the tension filling the room. Finally, Nathan stepped forward. "Can we talk?" Hannah closed the book she had been organizing. "About what?" "About yesterday." "Which part?" she asked. "The part where I discovered you are one of the most powerful businessmen in the city?" Nathan nodded. "That part." Hannah crossed her arms. "You could have told me." "I know. You should have told me." "I know that too." His willingness to admit it only made the situation more complicated. Hannah wanted to be angry. She wanted a simple explanation. Instead, she found herself facing the same thoughtful man she had known for months. "Why?" she asked quietly. Nathan looked around the bookstore before answering. "Because I wanted one honest friendship." Hannah stared at him. "You think I would have treated you differently?" "Most people do." The answer came without hesitation. "The moment they learn who I am, everything changes. Maybe because you give them the chance to make that decision for themselves." Nathan lowered his gaze briefly. "That is fair." The honesty in his response made it difficult to continue arguing. Yet the hurt remained. "You sat in this bookstore for months," she said. "You listened to me talk about rent problems. About struggling to keep this place open." "Yes. And all that time you knew you had resources I could not even imagine." Nathan nodded slowly. "Yes." The admission landed heavily between them. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, Hannah looked away. "I need time." Nathan accepted the words immediately. "I understand." Before leaving, he paused near the door. "For what it is worth, Hannah, every conversation we had was real." Then he walked away. The following weeks felt strange. Nathan kept his promise. He gave her space. No unexpected visits. No coffee deliveries. No invitations. Hannah told herself it was for the best. Yet she noticed his absence everywhere. The empty chair in the reading corner. The novels she would have recommended to him. The conversations that never happened. One evening, after closing the bookstore, she sat alone beneath the warm glow of a reading lamp. The old flashlight rested nearby on the counter. Without thinking, she picked it up. Her father's words returned immediately. "If you have light, share it." Hannah smiled sadly. The memory reminded her of something she had been trying to ignore. Nathan had shared his time, his attention, his support, even before she knew who he was. He never treated her with pity, never acted superior. If anything, he seemed happiest when nobody knew his status at all. A few days later, another surprise arrived. This time it came in the form of a letter delivered to the bookstore. Hannah opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a simple invitation. No corporate logo, no official branding. Just a date, a time, and an address. At the bottom, a handwritten message appeared. "There is something I would like you to see. Nathan." Hannah stared at the note for a long time. Part of her wanted to throw it away. Another part remembered every genuine moment they had shared. Eventually, curiosity won. She folded the invitation and slipped it into her pocket. Because despite everything that had happened, one question still remained unanswered. What exactly had Nathan Carter been building all this time? Saturday arrived bright and clear. For the first time in weeks, Chicago seemed determined to make up for months of gray skies and cold rain. Hannah stood outside the address listed on Nathan's invitation and looked up at the building in front of her. It was familiar, very familiar. In fact, it was directly across the street from Brooks Corner Books. Confused, she checked the invitation again. The address was correct. Yet she could not understand why Nathan wanted her there. The building had been empty for years. Dust covered the windows. A faded leasing sign still hung near the entrance. Hannah crossed the street and stepped inside. The moment she entered, she stopped. The interior looked nothing like the abandoned structure she expected. Bright lights illuminated newly renovated rooms. Fresh paint covered the walls. Bookshelves lined entire sections of the building. Comfortable reading areas filled the open spaces. Community meeting rooms stretched toward the back. Children laughed somewhere upstairs. For a moment, Hannah thought she had entered the wrong building. Then she saw Nathan standing near the center of the room. He smiled the moment he noticed her. "You came." Hannah looked around in disbelief. "What is this?" Nathan took a slow breath. "Keep walking." Still confused, Hannah moved deeper into the building. Everywhere she looked, she found something familiar. A reading space designed exactly the way she once described. Community tables arranged according to ideas she shared months earlier. Educational areas inspired by programs she had dreamed about expanding someday. Her heart began racing. "Nathan, keep going." He led her toward a large central room. Above the entrance hung a sign, Hannah Community Literacy Center. She stopped immediately. "No," Nathan smiled softly. "Yes." Hannah stared at the sign, then at him, then back at the sign. "You named this after me?" "The idea came from you." "Nathan, the entire project came from you." Emotion threatened to overwhelm her. She looked around again. Volunteers moved through the building preparing for opening day. Families toured the facility. Community leaders greeted visitors. Somehow, everything she had once imagined existed right in front of her. "You built all this?" she asked quietly. Nathan shook his head. "You inspired it." Hannah could not find words. For months, she had assumed Nathan's energy project was the important announcement. She had no idea he had been working on something else entirely, something much more personal. They continued walking through the center. Nathan showed her classrooms, tutoring spaces, technology labs, and reading rooms. Every detail reflected the values she cared about. Every room felt intentional, meaningful, real. Then they reached the final room. It was smaller than the others, more intimate. At first glance, it appeared to be a simple reading lounge. Then Hannah noticed a glass display mounted on the wall. Inside sat an old flashlight. Her flashlight, the one her father had given her years ago. Hannah stared at it in shock. "How did you?" Nathan smiled. "You left it behind one evening. You kept it. For a while." He stepped closer to the display. Beneath the flashlight sat a small plaque. "If you have light, share it." Hannah felt tears forming instantly. Her father's words. The lesson she carried through life. The lesson Nathan never forgot. "This place exists because of that idea," Nathan said quietly. "Not because of money. Not because of me. Because one person believed small acts of kindness mattered." Hannah looked at him. For the first time since the conference, she fully understood. Nathan had never been trying to impress her. He had been listening. Every conversation, every dream, every concern. He had quietly built something she thought impossible. Not for recognition, not for publicity, simply because he believed it should exist. "I was wrong about you," she whispered. Nathan shook his head gently. "No, I gave you reasons to doubt me." Hannah smiled through tears. "Maybe." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Around them, the center buzzed with life and possibility. Finally, Hannah looked around one last time. "You really did all of this?" Nathan smiled. "Not all of it." "Then who?" He looked directly at her. "The woman who helped a stranger during a blackout and changed the way he saw the world." For the first time in months, every piece of confusion disappeared. In its place remained only gratitude, and something even deeper that neither of them needed to name anymore. 1 year later, the Literacy Center had become one of the most beloved places in the neighborhood. Every day, children filled the reading rooms. Adults attended workshops. Families gathered for community events. Volunteers moved through the building helping wherever they could. What had once existed only as an idea was now changing lives in ways neither Hannah nor Nathan could have imagined. Brooks Corner Books was thriving as well. The increased community activity brought new readers, new partnerships, and renewed energy. For the first time in years, Hannah no longer worried every month about whether the bookstore would survive. It had become more than a business. It had become part of something larger. On a bright spring afternoon, Hannah stood inside the Literacy Center watching a group of children choose books from a newly donated collection. Their excitement made her smile. Across the room, the old flashlight remained displayed inside its glass case. Visitors often stopped to read the plaque beneath it. Most never realized how much that simple object had changed. To them, it was just a flashlight. To Hannah, it represented her father. To Nathan, it represented the night everything began. You are doing it again. Hannah turned and saw Nathan approaching. Doing what? Staring at the flashlight. She laughed softly. It still feels strange seeing it in a display case. I think it deserves the attention. You would. Nathan smiled. Some things never changed. Despite the success, despite the recognition, he still preferred spending time in bookstores and community centers rather than executive offices. I have something to show you, he said. Hannah narrowed her eyes. Should I be worried? Probably not. That is not very reassuring. Nathan laughed. Come with me. Curious, Hannah followed him outside. They crossed the street toward Brooks Corner Books. The neighborhood looked vibrant in the afternoon sunlight. Families walked along the sidewalks. Local businesses buzzed with activity. Life seemed to fill every corner. Nathan led her through the bookstore and toward the rear courtyard. A small gathering of friends, volunteers, and community members waited there. Hannah immediately looked suspicious. What is going on? Several people smiled but refused to answer. Nathan guided her toward a wooden bench beneath a string of lights. For a moment, she simply looked around, confused. Then she noticed something resting on the bench. The flashlight. Not the display version. The actual flashlight. Hannah stared. How? Nathan sat beside her. The display contains a replica now. She picked up the flashlight carefully. The familiar scratches remained. The worn metal felt exactly the same. You took it out? Only for today. Hannah turned it over in her hands. Suddenly she noticed something different. The battery compartment had been replaced with a small engraved panel. Her breath caught. Nathan, he smiled nervously. Open it. Hannah looked at him. Then at the flashlight. Slowly she pressed the small latch. Inside, where batteries should have been, rested a ring. For a moment the entire world seemed to disappear. The sounds of the city faded. Conversations stopped. Even the wind felt distant. Nathan, she whispered again. For perhaps the first time since she had known him, the confident businessman looked genuinely uncertain. 1 year ago, he said quietly, a citywide blackout left me standing in the rain with no idea where I was going. Several people nearby smiled knowingly. Nathan continued. Then a woman carrying an old flashlight decided to help a complete stranger. Hannah felt tears gathering in her eyes. That woman gave me coffee, conversation, and a place to wait out the darkness. He looked directly at her. What she did not realize was that she also gave me something I had been missing for a very long time. Hannah could barely speak. What was that? Nathan smiled softly. Light. The single word carried more meaning than any speech ever could. Around them, the courtyard remained perfectly silent. You changed how I see success, he said. You changed how I see people. You changed my future. He carefully removed the ring from the flashlight compartment. Hannah Brooks, will you spend the rest of your life helping me share a little more light with the world? Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. Yet she was smiling too. Yes. The answer came instantly. Applause erupted around them. Friends cheered. Volunteers laughed. Several children who happened to be nearby began clapping enthusiastically without fully understanding why. Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger. For a moment, neither moved. They simply sat together beneath the lights while the people around them celebrated. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, Hannah and Nathan walked through the Literacy Center one final time. The building was quiet, peaceful. The flashlight display once again occupied its place of honor. Hannah stopped beside it and smiled. My father would have loved this. Nathan slipped his hand into hers. I think he would have been proud of you. Hannah looked around at the books, the classrooms, the community spaces, and the countless lives touched by one small act of kindness. Then she looked at Nathan, the stranger she met during a blackout, the man who had quietly listened to every dream she shared, the man who proved that generosity could transform far more than a single life. And standing there together in the warm glow of the center that kindness built, both of them understood the same truth. Sometimes the brightest future begins with a single light shared during the darkest night.